I got this comment a little bit ago, and I'm probably gonna break old but true's heart here. Today, I'm gonna talk about a feeling that I've been experiencing and disguising for a few years now, which can sound scary to a lot of anamorphic filmmakers out there. I don't have it in me to care about anamorphic adapters anymore. I'm still very passionate about anamorphics, cinematography, and filmmaking, but I can't stand adapters. But Tito, why? You might ask. Your entire channel is a platform for anamorphic adapters. You talked about dozens of them. How come now you're telling me you're sick of it? Stick around and hopefully you will see the light, if there is any. I'll also talk to folks that love adapters, so you can hear both sides and decide which one is right for you. To watch that, subscribe and stay tuned. Trying out Nick Kova's Atlas 40mm in December of 2018 was what sparked my tiredness about adapters and triggered one of the channel's biggest breaks, with almost no content between the end of 2018 and mid to late 2019. Up until that point, I had never used an actual anamorphic lens. Until then, I had only been involved with adapters, and pretty happy with that. Using adapters, I thought I had freedom to make my own combinations and come up with original, incredible new pairings. I didn't have access to lenses, but I told myself that I didn't want them because they'd lock me onto a look, while adapters are easily exchangeable. I had used the Photon A Lomo anamorphic lens, yet for all purposes, it almost counts as an adapter because of its quirks and limitations. I'm not gonna go as far as saying that I love tinkering and I love trying a million little things to make an adapter work, seeing it fail on dozens of tests. I love that. I'm not gonna say that. And if at any point I was given the chance of, hey, here's the solution to all of the issues that you're experiencing right now, I would have taken it on the spot. But what issues are you talking about? Filming with adapters is a game of patience where the gear almost always wins. Some of the most common issues are misalignment between the cylinders. That leads to inferior image quality. Other misalignment to slant the picture. You have double focus, which is a nightmare in itself. Veiling glare, uneven compression, high prices, particular rigging requirements for every adapter/lens combination. The added cost of variable diopters, front-heavy rigs, super heavy rigs, unclear coverage because every adapter is different, unpredictable pairings with taking lenses. I could go on, but you get the idea. This gets more tolerable if you're focused on a single adapter, trying to make it work for your style. But for the purposes of this channel, I rarely ever worked with the same adapter twice. So for every single video, I had to figure out mounting solutions, which I failed a bunch of times, using step rings and pairing to taking lenses, and just wing the rest. This led to a bunch of disappointment, videos that failed to capture how good adapters can look. It also led to burnout a couple times, but let's stay on track. And this is, in fact, the weakest point in my argument. Folks that have spent months or years fine-tuning their rigs can speak from a place of true love for an adapter. This channel started as an extension of my project to prove that anyone could make films and tell stories using anamorphics. But as I carried on reviewing adapters, it became a filmmaking loop YouTube is very popular for, being stuck in the planning of the film. Maybe the next one will be a better adapter and I'll be equipped to tell that story. It's like buying gear or researching the best cameras or best lenses, thinking every purchase or review pushes you one step closer to making your film. It doesn't. If we want to make films, we need to go and make them. Gear is the easiest problem to solve and also the easiest one to use as a crutch. Back to adapters. I've been arguing they have a lot of problems, but I also had a handful of them sitting around that I hadn't had a chance to test, and I couldn't bring myself to sell them before collecting information. So I took it upon testing while also observing for quirks. So let's do speedrun reviews here. In the next bit, we're going to look at various characteristics of those adapters. Cine Digitar, Yashica Scope, Canon C8, Kowa 8, Cine Forward S, a Sony slide projector adapter, ISCO Ultrastar Red, an unbranded 1.5 adapter for 35mm, Schneider Cinelux, Kowa 8Z, and Iskorama. I had to 3D print a ton of parts to rig up these lenses in an identical testing scenario. Very few adapters are camera ready or plug and play. If this was a test for an actual film, it would require more adequate rigging as well as a solution for double focus. Adapters come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, requiring different approaches. Rigging an adapter is a multi-step process where you'll find yourself going through the several step rings or clamps, then, if you're taking it more seriously, into custom-made clamps for your exact needs. A good example of how specific you need to get. You always want the rear of your adapter as close as possible to the front of the taking lens. Most clamps, however, will set the back of the adapter at the same level as the filter threads. In many taking lenses, you have a good centimeter or more of space until you reach the glass. So in an ideal rig, you can push the adapter almost to the point of touching the taking lens. Here's a sample of the difference you experience by pushing the Canon C8 towards the taking lens in such a way only a custom-made clamp could. The clamp needs to be custom-made because every person is using a different taking lens, so the spacing behind the clamp needs to change for every scenario. Even when changing taking lenses, this space will change. And if you decide to play smart like I did, clamping the anamorphic at the front and sliding it in, you'll need to find ways of blocking stray light from hitting your taking lens, otherwise you get ghosting, flaring, and all other kinds of weird artifacts. Again, custom solutions for every taking lens. What this means is, ultimately, rigging has a direct impact on how much coverage you can get out of any given adapter. We have members of the channel that make their own clamps or make special requests to manufacturers in order to save just a few millimeters. As they know, this will improve their results. Moving on to sharpness, when I started the channel, I believe there were sharp and soft adapters. Like, the Kowa B&H is the best anamorphic adapter. The Kowa 16H is one of those lenses that everybody wants. It usually comes up right after the Kowa B&H. Or the Proscar lens is soft and dreamy.
The sharpness though is not the best. You do need to step down to about f2.8 or f4 on a 1.4 lens. It's just not a really sharp lens.
I no longer believe that. All adapters are sharp, be it only at the center of the image, like the Sony, or across the entire frame, like the Cinelux or Cine Digitar. The only difference between sharp and soft being how well aligned are its elements, its cylinders. I've talked about this and made tutorials on it too. Alignment between the elements is key for proper sharpness, at least in the center. Then, optic size, quality, and design will impact performance towards the edges. And boy, we have lots of variation here. Many of the adapters I've reviewed before I learned this were not properly aligned, and I either didn't know about it or didn't know how to fix it then. Plus, fixing this stuff ain't fun. It's stressful. It risks ruining the lens by stripping screws, losing parts, or cracking the glass. On top of it, servicing takes a ton of time and patience. The two topics covered so far, coverage and sharpness, are also key components in determining the price of an adapter. You've seen the prices of everything skyrocket. I've seen Kowas go from $400 to $1,400 in a few years. And I'm not naive to think my research had nothing to do with the price increase. I've hammered on how the Kowa is the best anamorphic adapter, while putting down adapters that just weren't rigged or tuned properly. The only thing that gives me peace is that I didn't know it at the time, and I tried to address the issue when I started talking about sample variance. But now I know it, and I wonder what I can do moving forward to avoid the mistake of claiming something is bad because I'm not aware of its limitations. Speaking of moving forward, let's move on to flares. Flares are a staple of anamorphic adapters. Everyone wants flares, or you better want flares because if you don't, your options are severely limited. They come in many different flavors, depending on the color of the glass's coatings. The flare strength also depends on said coatings. Flares are the dead giveaway of misalignment. Oh, the other misalignment. The one that's about the direction of the squeeze factor. If your adapter is a little off angle, your image comes out skewed and it's tough to fix it in post without big compromises. And as you can see, even with lots of time, we still got alignment slightly off every once in a while during these tests. It's much harder to keep alignment locked when switching lenses and using screw-on clamps. I very much prefer a rail-mounted solution, but that in itself requires rails, making the whole setup bigger and heavier. You also have Rapido's jackets that encompass your whole system, giving it a neater look at the setback of a couple $100 and the addition of a couple 100 grams to your load. I like light and I like cheap, so jackets aren't for me. Actually, jackets are a good representation of the problem at stake. Jackets address many issues of adapters, yet, ultimately, they're like patching a leak with tape.
Phil Swift here for Flex Tape.
It works, but it doesn't really solve the problem. The problem is part of the system. You can't solve the problem of adapters. There's not an ultimate solution that works for everyone, which creates a system where exceptions are the rule. I'm not even going to start on the impact of taking lenses. That's for the next module of the cookbook. Let's just say they greatly affect bokeh, performance, and bring their own personal problems to the mix. You need perfect infinity, you need perfect flange distance, you need non-rotating front, you want a non-extending front, you don't want recessed optics, nor a very large front, and so on. Let's get started on the very large front issue. When I got started in adapters, I learned adapters don't reduce light transmission. It's a Japanese design with big front and rear glass, which leads to no light loss. Guess what? That's usually incorrect. But it depends on your adapter/taking lens combination. If the rear of your adapter is too small, like the Iskorama's, and the front of your taking lens is much bigger, like this contact size f1.4, it would be ignorance to think you're not losing any light. How can I believe this little thing will give out all the light this giant front can take? This is called a mechanical aperture. When you have something in your optical system that cuts out light before the actual lens's aperture. So in a rig like this, I can set my taking lens at f1.4, but what I'm getting is actually the same as if I set it to f2. Exposure doesn't change at all with the change in aperture because the aperture has been set by another part of the design, the rear of the anamorphic. That's why when working with baby anamorphics, you have to be very careful about choosing your taking lenses to avoid this issue and also take advantage of their tiny size. We've gone over several different properties, flare, light transmission, sharpness, alignment, that are unique to each individual lens, meaning it's near impossible to have a flare like this one, but also coverage like this other one, and the weight of this lens combined with the ease of rigging of another one. Adapters are versatile in terms of looks, but they're also very restrictive. At first, you have the illusion that you can create endless combinations, but you really can't. If you are to work under the strict limitations imposed by each adapter, your combinations are far from endless. You either accept the whole package of good and bad stuff, or you can't stand it and you move on to a different adapter with a different rig, different taking lenses, and a deeper hole in your wallet. Speaking of money, I believe the sunken cost of adapters is a huge barrier for the acceptance of cheap, new anamorphics. We have spent thousands of dollars on these rigs. I can understand being skeptical and resistant to the idea that you could get a comparable result spending a lot less money and much less time. It's like owning a cinema camera and chatting with someone that defends the idea of making films on their phone. We want to feel like we made the right choice spending the money and the time to master our tools. The constant fear of, what if I'm going to be replaced by this cheap thing? So we push our claws and attack, going to a place of fear instead of acceptance. A close friend, member of the channel and longtime vintage anamorphic user, opened my eyes to this idea when he pointed out after watching Great Joy's review. Great video, but it showed me how persistent my own biases are against new budget lenses. I can't seem to overcome them, even with meticulous evidence against them, like your video. I'd rather call it a bias towards vintage lenses. Anyone going into anamorphics now has a leg up on us compared to when we started, or at least when I started. I don't know about you. New users have access to information, options of gear to choose from, and a huge community of people obsessed about the subject. Yet, most of us old schoolers insist on saying, back in the day, this, or putting down new stuff, as if it doesn't live up to our standards. The thing is, no one should need to spend as much as we did, or bang their heads on the wall as much as we did to get good results. Things were harder when we started, yes, but that's in the past now, and the present is better than the past was. If someone showed up saying, hey, here's the solution to all of the issues that you're experiencing right now, I would have taken it. And when it comes to anamorphic adapters, the solution to all of these problems are anamorphic lenses. When discussing the choice between adapters or new lenses, Satan, one of the most active members of the channel, put it perfectly. Just considering how much would one spend money on filters, step-up rings, clamps, different permutations of VDs, and projector scopes, and still end up with a fidgety build that takes away time and has a higher risk of botched shots, it seems like the real savings would be done investing a few hundred more into a native anamorphic lens rather than all the complicated fidgety stuff. In the end, I could see myself spending less by purchasing one or two $1,500 lenses that are actually easier to use and I will love to shoot with. Which slingshots me back to the beginning of this video and the feeling that I can't stand anamorphic adapters any longer. Adapters make making videos a not fun thing. Adapters get in the way of telling stories the way that I want to tell them, as they demand too much attention. They create a leak on my creative drive, letting me stay in my comfort zone of dealing with useless little quirks instead of pushing towards and trying to tell better stories. The popularization of anamorphic lenses is a huge win for our community. This is just the start. If you only got into anamorphics now and have fun complaining about Atlas's prices, Surei's flares, or mount choices, you missed out on decades of drought and zero new options. We didn't have anyone to complain to because no one cared. Now you got people who care and who are invested in this market. I've been into anamorphics for almost a decade now, and if there's one thing to take away from all anamorphics is that they're never perfect. The play is on the word perfect. We like anamorphics for their imperfections, but funny enough, there is a clear set of perfect imperfections. 2x squeeze, full frame coverage, going super wide, smooth oval bokeh, non-radioactive flares, and dirt cheap. If you keep waiting for all of this to come at you in one neat package right away, you might as well go home now. As a community, we have a voice and lens makers listen to it. Their market is still small and your opinions are funded in years of experimenting. It would be stupid of them not to listen. Yet, have patience. Making lenses takes time. A lot of time. Atlas started the revolution by making cinema anamorphics affordable. Their 40mm lens was what shoved me out of adapters, and Surrey exploded the doors for the indie community. If you want to try anamorphic, now you finally can, with minimal effort, little research, and low investment. This gives me immense happiness. Now that I took all of this out of my chest, I can chill out for a bit. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you on the next one. Holy shit, that was long.
26 minutes. Got it.
Whew. One last reminder, we have an episode coming up featuring a series of interviews with folks that love their adapter setups, and we talk about the things that work for them. So keep an eye out for Everything Right with Anamorphic Adapters.